"You work for me now," the rich man said. The biker smiled. "I work for respect," and walked away. The rain came down like nails on the asphalt outside the glass tower, and Reed stood in the lobby dripping water onto marble that cost more than his bike. His boots left mud prints that some kid in a uniform would scrub away before the hour turned, and he didn't apologize for it. The security guard had his hand near his belt, but Reed just stood there with his cut soaked through, the wolf's head patch on his back bleeding color onto the floor, and waited. He'd been summoned. He'd come. But he hadn't come to kneel. Wait, before the next ride begins. If this story already hit you right in the chest, tell us where you're watching from. To ride with the Brotherhood through the next promise, loss, or redemption, subscribe and join the club. Engines up. Back to the road. 30 floors up, Marcus Hale stood at a window that framed the city like he owned it. Maybe he did. Reed had heard the stories. Tech billions, real estate empires, politicians on speed dial. The kind of man who could make problems disappear with a phone call or create them with a signature. The kind of man who thought everything had a price. Because, in his experience, everything did. Reed took the elevator alone. The security guard had wanted to escort him, but one look was enough. Some men you don't escort. You just point them in the right direction and hope they don't leave too much of a mark. The doors opened to an office that wasn't an office. It was a statement. Floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that looked like art, a desk made from a single piece of wood that probably came from a tree older than the country. And behind it, Marcus Hale, 50-something, silver at the temples, suit that cost what Reed made in 6 months, looking at Reed like he was a puzzle he'd already solved. "You're late," Hale said. "You didn't give me a time," Reed replied.
"Just an address and a polite suggestion that I show up." Hale smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sit." Reed stood standing. Water dripped from his jacket onto the floor, each drop deliberate as a drumbeat. "I'll stand. Won't be long." "You don't know that yet." Hale moved from behind the desk, buttoning his jacket with the practiced ease of a man who'd never known manual labor. "I've been watching you, Reed. Watching your club. The Iron Wolves, is it?" "It is." "Small operation. 50 members, maybe 60 on a good day. You run a garage in Westridge, do some light hauling. Keep your noses clean for the most part. Respectable as far as these things go." Hale poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, didn't offer Reed one. "But struggling. The garage barely breaks even. The clubhouse needs a new roof. Your brothers are good men, but good men need to eat." Reed's jaw tightened. "You didn't bring me here for a financial report." "No, I brought you here with an offer." Hale took a sip, studying Reed over the rim of his glass. "I own property all over the city. Warehouses, shipping yards, construction sites. I need security. Real security. Not the rent-a-cop outfits that patrol in golf carts. I need men who understand loyalty, who know how to handle themselves, who people respect and fear in equal measure. You need muscle. I need professionals with a reputation." Hale set down his glass. "I'm prepared to pay your club $200,000 a year, cash, no questions. You provide security for my properties, make sure things run smooth, keep the rats away from the grain." Reed didn't move, didn't blink. $200,000 would change everything. New roof, new equipment, could pay off Hawk's medical bills from the accident last spring, could set up a scholarship fund for Bishop's daughter, could mean his brothers wouldn't have to choose between pride and survival. "And what would you want us to do exactly?" Reed asked. "When you say keep the rats away."
Hale smiled wider now. "Whatever needs doing. I'm a businessman, Reed. Sometimes business gets complicated. Sometimes people need to be encouraged to see things a certain way. Sometimes problems need to disappear before they become lawsuits or headlines." He stepped closer, close enough that Reed could smell the cologne that probably cost more than a motorcycle. "I'm offering you a chance to be part of something bigger than fixing bikes and riding in circles. Your work for me now, and your club stops being a hobby and starts being an empire." The words hung in the air like exhaust fumes. Reed looked past Hale, out the window at the city stretching away in the rain. From up here, the streets were just lines, the people just dots, the whole world reduced to something you could control with the right leverage. From down there, on the road, it was different. Down there, people had faces and names and stories. Down there, respect meant something because it had to be earned, with every mile, every handshake, every promise kept. "You work for me now," Hale said again, like it was already decided. Like Reed standing here meant he'd already agreed, already sold himself and his brothers for a dollar amount that seemed big until you realized what it was buying. Reed smiled. Not a big smile, just the kind that comes when something becomes clear, when the fog lifts and you see the road ahead for what it is. "I work for respect," Reed said, "not for you." He turned and walked toward the elevator. "You're making a mistake," Hale called after him. "That money could save your club." Reed pressed the button, heard the mechanism whir to life. "My club doesn't need saving. We're not for sale." "Everyone's for sale, Reed. You just haven't heard the right price yet." The elevator doors opened. Reed stepped inside, turned to face Hale one last time.
The rich man stood there, framed by his window and his empire, and for just a second, Reed saw something in his face. Not anger, not surprise, but something closer to confusion, like he'd encountered a problem he couldn't solve with money or power or threats. "You know what your problem is," Reed said. "You think respect is something you can buy, but the men I ride with, the brothers who die for each other on a dark road in the middle of nowhere, we know better. Respect is something you earn, and you can't earn it from the top of a tower." The doors closed. Reed rode home through the rain, his bike cutting through water that turned the streets into mirrors. The city looked different from down here, harder, realer, more honest. The engine thrummed beneath him, familiar and true, and he thought about the conversation he'd have to have with his brothers. Thought about how he'd explain turning down money they desperately needed because of something as intangible as respect. But respect wasn't intangible. Not really. It was the only thing that mattered when everything else got stripped away. The clubhouse sat on the edge of Westridge like a defiant fist, weathered brick and peeling paint and a roof that leaked in 3 places when it rained hard enough. The lot was full, bikes lined up like soldiers, each one different but all part of the same army. Reed pulled in, killed his engine, and sat for a moment, listening to the rain drum on the pavement. Inside, his brothers were waiting. Hawk sat at the bar, his left leg still in a brace from where the SUV had clipped him 6 months ago. The surgeries had taken everything he'd saved, and then some. He was healing slow, too slow, and they all knew he might never ride the same again. Bishop nursed a beer in the corner, his phone face down on the table. His ex-wife had called 3 times that day about his daughter's college fund, about how he was a deadbeat, about how being in a motorcycle club wasn't a real job.
Mason, the oldest of them, stood by the window watching the rain. He'd lost his house last year, moved into a studio apartment above a laundromat. He never complained, but they all saw it in his eyes, the weight of trying to keep dignity when the world kept taking pieces of you. And there were others. Diesel, who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't make rent some months. Knox, whose truck had died and who'd been borrowing rides to get to work. Trace, who'd been selling his tools one by one to keep his kid in the private school that gave him a chance at something better. They all looked up when Reed walked in, water streaming off him onto the wooden floor that had seen 1,000 boots and 1,000 stories. "Well?" Hawk asked. "What did the prince in the tower want?" Reed pulled off his cut, hung it on the hook that had held his father's cut before him, his grandfather's before that. The wolf's head snarled in the dim light, proud and defiant and true. "He wanted to buy us," Reed said. The room went quiet. "How much?" Bishop asked, and there was no judgment in his voice, just the practical question of a man who'd learned that pride didn't pay for college. $200,000 a year. Someone whistled low. Hawk's beer stopped halfway to his mouth. Mason turned from the window, his weathered face unreadable. "For what?" Mason asked. "Security work, his properties, probably some other things he didn't say out loud." Reed grabbed a beer from the cooler, twisted off the cap. Things that would make us his dogs instead of free men. 200,000, Diesel said quietly. That's real money, Reed. It's real chains, Reed replied. Chains that could fix Hawk's leg properly, Bishop said, and everyone looked at Hawk, who looked down at his brace like it was the first time he'd seen it. Chains that could save Bishop's relationship with his daughter, Knox added.
Chains that could mean we're not all one bad month away from losing everything we've got left, Trace finished. Reed drank his beer, let the words settle. They weren't wrong. The money would solve problems, real problems that kept his brothers up at night, that put lines on their faces and weight on their shoulders. He'd be lying if he said he hadn't thought about it on the ride home, hadn't considered what it would mean to say yes. You know what he said to me? Reed sent down his beer. He said, "You work for me now." Like it was already decided. Like showing up meant I'd already agreed to be his property. What did you say? Mason asked. I told him I work for respect. Then I walked out. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes when men are thinking, weighing, measuring their lives against their principles, and trying to figure out which one weighs more. I got a question, Hawk said finally. What happens to respect when you can't pay your rent? When you can't fix your bike? When you have to choose between the club and feeding your kids? He looked around the room. I'm asking honest, because I don't know the answer. Respect is all we got, Mason said. Money comes and goes. People betray you. Opportunities vanish. Empires crumble. But if you keep your respect, if you stay true to the code, you can look yourself in the mirror. Hard to look in the mirror when you're homeless, Bishop muttered. Bishop's right. Diesel stood up. I'm not saying we should have taken Hale's offer, but I am saying we need to be real about where we are. This club is bleeding. The garage barely keeps the lights on. Half of us are working side jobs just to make it. At some point, we have to ask ourselves, what are we fighting for? What are we protecting? Reed walked to the wall where the club's history hung in frames, black and white photos of founders, faded newspaper clippings, patches from chapters that had long since closed.
The Iron Wolves had been riding for 40 years, through recessions and raids, through deaths and betrayals, through everything the world could throw at them. And they'd survived because they'd never forgotten what they were. My grandfather started this club, Reed said, not turning around. You all know the story. He came back from Vietnam with shrapnel in his leg and ghosts in his head. The government didn't want to know him. Society didn't have a place for him. But he found brothers, men who understood what it meant to keep a promise, to watch each other's backs, to stand for something, even when it cost you. He turned to face them. He used to say that the moment you sell your respect, you're not a club anymore. You're just a gang, just muscle for hire, just men who forgot that the whole point of the ride is freedom. Freedom doesn't pay the bills, Hawk said quietly. No, Reed admitted, it doesn't, but neither does slavery, and that's what Hale was offering, a gilded cage with a salary. Knox spoke up for the first time. So what do we do? Because Diesel's right. We can't keep going like this. Something's got to give. Reed looked at each of them. These men who'd become more than brothers, who'd buried each other's fathers and held each other's children and kept each other alive through nights that would have broken lesser men. We do what we've always done, Reed said. We ride, we work, we take care of our own, but we do it on our terms, not Hale's terms. We find another way. What way? Bishop asked. We've been looking for another way for 3 years. The garage isn't growing. The contracts aren't coming. The city's changing, and we're getting left behind. Then maybe we change too, Reed said, but we change while keeping our souls intact. Mason moved from the window, his boots heavy on the old wood. I've been riding with this club for 28 years, seen presidents come and go, seen brothers rise and fall, seen the world turn upside down a dozen times.
And the one thing that's kept us together, the one thing that's made us more than just guys on bikes, is that we mean what we say. We stand for something. He looked at Reed. You walked away from that money because it came with strings attached, because taking it would have made us Hale's property. That took guts, brother. But Hawk's question stands. What good is respect if it leaves us broken? The answer, Reed said slowly, is that respect is the only thing that keeps us from being broken. Everything else can be taken. Money, bikes, property, even our lives. But respect, the knowledge that we kept our word and stayed true, that's ours forever. That's what lets us sleep at night. Poetry, Diesel said, but not unkindly. But my landlord doesn't take poetry as rent. Reed smiled grimly. No, He doesn't, which is why we're going to figure this out together. We're going to find work that pays and that we can do with our heads high. We're going to build something that lasts, not because some rich man bought us, but because we earned it ourselves. How? Knox asked. I don't know yet, Reed admitted, but I know the first step is not selling ourselves to a man who thinks respect is just another commodity. They sat with that for a while, the rain continuing its assault on the roof, each drop a reminder that the world didn't care about their principles or their pride. The world wanted results, wanted money, wanted power. The world would eat them alive if they let it. But they weren't going to let it. I'm in, Hawk said finally, for whatever comes next. Reed's right. The day we start working for a man like Hale is the day we stop being who we are. I'm in, Mason echoed. One by one, they all said it. Bishop, Diesel, Knox, Trace. Every man in that room, knowing it meant continuing to struggle, continuing to fight for every dollar and every inch, but doing it as free men.
Reed felt something settle in his chest, something that had been tight since he'd walked out of that elevator. His brothers had his back. They always had. And whatever came next, they'd face it together. 3 days later, the first brick went through the clubhouse window. It came at 2 a.m. when only Mason was there, crashed on the couch after a double shift at the docks. The glass exploded inward, and the brick landed on the floor wrapped in a note. Reconsider. No signature. Didn't need one. Reed got the call from Mason and rode through empty streets, the city silent except for his engine and the occasional bark of a distant dog. When he arrived, Mason was sweeping up glass, his face carved from stone. Just the one brick? Reed asked. So far, Mason dumped the glass in a trash bag, but I don't think it'll be the last. He was right. The next night, someone slashed the tires on 4 bikes in the parking lot. The night after that, a fire started in a dumpster behind the clubhouse, caught early, but the message was clear. The night after that, the garage got vandalized, spray paint across the bay doors. For sale. Hale never called, never reached out directly. He didn't have to. The message was clear. You can't refuse me. You can only delay the inevitable. Reed called a meeting. Every member of the Iron Wolves showed up, and the clubhouse felt smaller somehow, the walls closing in with the weight of what they all knew was happening. Hale's making his point, Reed said, standing in front of them all. He thinks he can pressure us into taking his deal, thinks we'll get scared, get desperate, get smart. It's working, someone muttered. Is it? Reed looked around the room. Because last I checked, we're all still here. We're all still standing. Nobody's run, nobody's quit, nobody's suggested we call Hale and beg for his money. Give it time, Bishop said darkly. No, Reed's voice cut through the murmurs. We don't give it time.
We give it action. Hale wants to play games? Fine. But he's playing in our city, on our streets, with our brothers. And he's about to learn that respect isn't something you can break with bricks and fire. What's the play? Diesel asked. Reed had been thinking about it for 3 days, ever since the first brick. Thinking about Hale's empire, about the properties he owned, about the image he projected. Men like Hale lived and died by reputation. They built towers to hide behind, bought politicians to protect them, created illusions of invincibility. But illusions could be shattered. We don't fight him with violence, Reed said. We fight him with truth. We find out what Hale doesn't want people to know, and we make sure people know it. You want to dig up dirt on a billionaire? Knox sounded skeptical. Guy probably has lawyers on retainer just to bury secrets. Then we find the secrets that can't be buried, Reed replied. Every man has them, especially men who think they're untouchable. Mason stood up. I know a guy. Used to ride with the Scorpions before they folded. Works in city records now. Has access to permits, inspections, business filings. If Hale's got skeletons, that's where they'd be buried. Good, Reed said. Start there. The rest of us, we keep our eyes and ears open. We talk to people who've worked for Hale, people who've done business with him. We find the cracks in his armor. And if we don't find any, Bishop asked, we will, Reed said with certainty, because men who think they can buy respect are usually men who've done things they don't want people to know about. They dispersed into the night, each man with a task, each one understanding that they were no longer just defending their club, they were going to war. A different kind of war, fought with information instead of fists, but war nonetheless. Reed stayed behind after the others left,
walking through the clubhouse in the dark. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered.
Yeah? You're making this harder than it needs to be. Hale's voice, smooth and controlled. I'm trying to help you, Reed, you and your brothers. By throwing bricks through our windows? A pause. I don't know what you're talking about? Sure you don't. Reed walked to the broken window, looked out at the parking lot where his brother's bikes sat like monuments to defiance. Here's the thing, Hale. You think you can pressure us into working for you. You think if you make things hard enough, uncomfortable enough, we'll come crawling back with our hats in our hands. And you won't. We won't. Reed's voice was steel. Because you still don't understand. This isn't about money. This isn't about comfort. This is about who we are. And we're not men who kneel. Everyone kneels eventually, Hale said. When the pressure's right, when the pain's enough, everyone breaks. Then I guess you're going to find out just how much pressure we can take. Reed hung up. He stood there for a long moment, phone in hand, looking at the wolf's head patch on the wall. His grandfather smiled down from a faded photograph, standing beside his bike on some long-ago road, young and strong and free. Reed wondered what he would have done, faced with this situation. Wondered if he would have been proud of his grandson's choice or disappointed by his stubbornness. But he knew the answer. His grandfather had once turned down a bribe from a corrupt sheriff who'd wanted the club to look the other way on some smuggling operation. The sheriff had threatened them, harassed them, made their lives hell for 6 months. And his grandfather had never wavered, never compromised, never forgot that some things matter more than comfort. The sheriff eventually got caught by the feds. The club survived. The lesson stuck. Reed left the clubhouse and rode home through streets that knew his name, past businesses where he'd worked, bars where he'd fought, corners where he'd laughed and loved, and learned what it meant to be a man.
This was his city too, not just Hale's. These streets belonged to everyone who'd ever put down roots here, who'd ever decided this was where they'd make their stand. And the Iron Wolves weren't leaving. Mason's contact came through 2 days later. They met at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the coffee was burnt and the eggs were greasy, but nobody asked questions. Mason's guy was named Donnie, short and nervous, with the look of someone who'd seen things he wished he could unsee. "I could lose my job for this," Donnie said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Appreciate the risk," Mason replied. Donnie glanced around the diner like the walls had ears. "Hale's dirty, really dirty, but he's smart about it. Layers of LLCs, dummy corporations, offshore accounts. On paper, everything looks clean." "But not in reality?" Reed asked. "Not even close." Donnie tapped the folder. 3 years ago, Hale bought a block of apartments in Riverside, low-income housing, mostly immigrant families. He promised to renovate, improve conditions, make it livable, got tax breaks from the city for promising to maintain affordable housing. "Let me guess," Mason said. "He didn't renovate." "Worse, he let the buildings deteriorate, ignored violations, refused to make repairs. 4 families got displaced when the roof caved in last winter. Could have killed someone. The city inspector who tried to cite him got reassigned to traffic duty a week later." Reed opened the folder. Inside were inspection reports, photographs of moldy walls and collapsed ceilings, letters from tenants pleading for basic repairs. And there were emails, deleted emails that someone had recovered, showing Hale instructing his property managers to ignore complaints and let the buildings rot so he could eventually condemn them and redevelop the land for luxury condos. "This is gold," Mason said quietly. "There's more." Donnie pulled out another document.
Hale's construction company has been cited 17 times for safety violations. 3 workers have died on his sites in the past 5 years. Each time, the families got paid off, signed NDAs, and the cases disappeared. There's a pattern: cutting costs, ignoring regulations, valuing profit over human life. Reed looked at the photographs of workers in unsafe conditions, scaffolding that didn't meet code, safety equipment that was barely functional. He thought about his brothers, about how they'd risk their lives not for money, but for each other, about how that meant something that could never be bought or sold. "Why hasn't this come out before?" Reed asked. "Because Hale's good at making things disappear," Donnie said. "He owns people, city officials, journalists, lawyers, and the people he doesn't own, he intimidates. You think those bricks through your window were random?" He shook his head. "That's his playbook. Pressure, threaten, bury. Most people can't fight back. We're not most people, Mason said. No, Donnie agreed, but you should know what you're getting into. Hale doesn't lose. He's been playing this game for 20 years and he's never lost. Reed closed the folder. Every streak ends. They paid for breakfast and left, the folder heavy in Reed's hands. This was it, the ammunition they needed. The question was how to use it without getting buried themselves. Back at the clubhouse, Reed spread the documents across the bar. His brothers gathered around, reading in silence, their faces growing darker with each page. Son of a bitch, Hawk muttered. 3 dead workers, families living in mold, and he wanted to hire us for security? He wanted to hire us to protect this, Bishop said, gesturing at the documents, to make sure nobody looked too closely at what he was doing. So what do we do with it? Diesel asked. We can't just go to the cops. Hale owns half the department, and the media won't touch it without proof that'll stand up in court.
Reed had been thinking about this. We don't go through official channels. We go directly to the people who care most. The families, Mason said, catching on. The families, the workers, the communities he's been destroying, Reed confirmed. We give them the information, help them organize, support them in fighting back. We become the voice they couldn't afford to buy. Knox frowned. That's a long play, Reed, and it doesn't stop the bricks through our windows tonight. No, Reed admitted, but it does something more important. It shows people who Hale really is. It builds a coalition of people who've been wronged and gives them the tools to fight back. Hale's power comes from operating in the shadows, from people being too scared or too isolated to resist. We shine a light on what he's doing, and we help people stand together. And that's going to piss him off, Trace warned. Good, Reed said. Angry people make mistakes. They spent the next week working carefully, methodically. Mason reached out to tenant organizations and workers' rights groups. Bishop, who had experience with legal documentation from his own custody battles, helped prepare packets of information that would be useful in court. Diesel and Knox visited the families who'd been displaced, the workers who'd been injured, offering support and showing them they weren't alone. And Reed went to see a journalist. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she worked for a small independent news outlet that had a reputation for taking on stories the major papers wouldn't touch. Reed had done his research. She'd exposed corruption in city government before, gone after powerful people, and lived to tell the tale. They met in her office, a cramped space above a bookstore that smelled like coffee and old paper. I know who you are, Sarah said, studying Reed with sharp eyes. Iron Wolves, motorcycle club. You've kept your nose clean, from what I can tell. We try, Reed said.
So why are you here? Clubs don't usually invite media attention. Reed put the folder on her desk. Because sometimes staying clean means getting your hands dirty. Sarah opened the folder, started reading. Her expression changed as she went through the documents, surprise giving way to focus, focus hardening into anger. Where did you get this? She asked. Does it matter? It does if I'm going to publish it. I need to verify sources, confirm authenticity. I can't just... It's real, Reed interrupted. Every document, every photograph, every email. You can verify it yourself. But the question isn't whether it's real. The question is whether you're brave enough to publish it. Sarah looked up at him. Hale will sue me into oblivion. Only if he can prove it's false. Can he? She looked back at the documents, her jaw tight. Reed could see her weighing it. The career risk, the personal danger, the professional obligation. He knew what it was like to face that choice, to decide whether to do the right thing or the safe thing. Give me 2 weeks, Sarah said finally. I'll verify everything, build a case that'll hold up. If it's as bad as this looks, I'll publish it. 1 week, Reed countered. Every day we wait, more people suffer. 1 week, Sarah agreed. But if Hale comes after me, he'll have to go through us first. Reed left her office feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Not the desperate kind that makes you take bad deals, but the earned kind that comes from doing the work, from fighting the fight the right way. But Hale wasn't waiting. That night, the clubhouse burned. Reed got the call at midnight from a neighbor who'd seen the smoke. By the time he arrived, half the building was engulfed, flames reaching into the sky like angry fingers. Fire trucks blocked the street, firefighters battling the blaze with water that turned to steam on contact.
Mason stood in the parking lot, his face lit orange by the fire.
"Everyone got out," he said. "No casualties." "What happened?" "Accelerant," Mason said grimly. "Someone poured gasoline around the foundation and lit it up. Professional job." Reed watched his clubhouse burn, watched 40 years of history turn to ash and smoke. The photographs on the walls, the patches of fallen brothers, the tools and furniture and memories, all of it feeding the flames. But the bikes were safe, the brothers were safe, and the wolf's head cut on Reed's back remained intact. "He thinks this will break us," Reed said quietly. "Will it?" Mason asked. Reed thought about his grandfather, about the stories he'd heard as a kid. About how the club had been raided once, had their bikes impounded, their members arrested on false charges. About how they'd come back stronger, more united, more committed to the code. "No," Reed said. "This just proves we're winning." The fire burned through the night. By dawn, all that remained was a blackened shell, smoke still rising from the ruins. The Iron Wolves stood in a circle around it, 50 brothers in their cuts, saying nothing because there was nothing to say that the ashes didn't already speak. But they didn't leave. They stayed, bearing witness, marking the moment. Because that's what brothers do. Hale called that afternoon. "I heard about the fire," he said, his voice carrying false sympathy. "Terrible thing. I hope everyone's all right." "Everyone's fine," Reed said coldly. "Good, good. Listen, Reed, I want you to know my offer still stands. In fact, given your recent difficulties, I'm prepared to increase it. $300,000 a year. That'll more than cover rebuilding, getting you back on your feet. We don't need your money. You don't have a clubhouse anymore."
You think your brothers are going to keep riding for pride when they don't even have a place to meet. Reed looked around the parking lot where they'd set up a temporary camp. Tents and folding chairs, bikes arranged in protective circles, brothers sharing coffee and stories and determination. "We've got exactly what we need," Reed said. "Each other." "Sentiment is wonderful," Hale said, his voice hardening. "But it doesn't rebuild buildings. It doesn't pay for damages. It doesn't protect you from what comes next." "What comes next is you going down." Reed's voice was calm, certain. "See, you made a mistake, Hale. You thought burning our clubhouse would break us, but all you did was prove you're scared, and scared men make mistakes." "I'm not." "Sarah Chen is running a story about you, about the families you displaced, the workers you killed, the laws you broke. It'll be published in 3 days, and when it drops, every person you've ever wronged is going to come forward. Every violation you've buried is going to see daylight." Silence on the line. Then, "You can't prove anything." "We don't have to. Sarah has documents, photographs, testimony. You can sue her, you can threaten her, but the truth's already out there. It's over, Hale." "This isn't over," Hale said, his composure cracking. "You have no idea what you've started. I will bury you. I will destroy everything you've built. Your club will be a memory, and you'll spend the rest of your life knowing you chose pride over survival." "No," Reed said. "I chose respect over slavery. There's a difference." He hung up. The story ran 4 days later, front page of Sarah's outlet, with a headline that pulled no punches. "Empire of Neglect: How Billionaire Marcus Hale Built Wealth on Workers' Graves." It spread fast, picked up by larger papers, shared across social media, discussed on local news. The photographs of moldy apartments and unsafe work sites went viral. Families came forward with their own stories. Workers who'd been paid to stay silent found courage in numbers and spoke out. City officials who'd looked the other way suddenly faced pressure to investigate. Hale's empire didn't crumble overnight. Men that powerful never fall quickly. But cracks appeared. Lawsuits filed. Investigations opened. The invincible image he'd carefully constructed started to fracture. And the Iron Wolves rebuilt. It wasn't easy. They couldn't afford a new building, so they converted an old warehouse Bishop found on the industrial edge of town. It wasn't pretty. Concrete floors, exposed beams, heating that barely worked. But it was theirs. They painted the walls themselves, installed the plumbing, wired the electricity. Every brother contributed time, labor, whatever they could give. Mason found work doing security for the tenant organization that was suing Hale.
Diesel got a contract hauling equipment for a workers' co-op that formed after the story broke. Knox started teaching motorcycle maintenance to kids in the neighborhood, building goodwill and bringing in a steady trickle of repair business. Bishop's daughter reached out for the first time in 2 years. She'd seen the news story, seen her father standing with families who'd been wronged, saw him fighting for something bigger than himself. They met for coffee, and it was awkward and difficult, and wonderful. Hawk's leg healed slowly, but he was riding again. Not long hauls, not yet, but around town, to meetings, to support his brothers. The medical bills were still crushing, but the club pooled resources to help, and he was managing. They survived. More than that, they grew stronger. 6 months after the fire, Reed stood outside the new clubhouse watching the sun set over the city. The place still smelled like fresh paint and hope. Inside, his brothers were gathering for the weekly meeting, their voices carrying through the open door. Sarah pulled up in her old sedan, rolled down the window.
Thought you'd want to know. The DA filed criminal charges against Hale this morning. Wire fraud, building code violations, conspiracy to obstruct justice. He's looking at serious time. Reed nodded slowly. Thanks for telling me. Thank you, Sarah said, for giving me the story, for trusting me with it. You earned that trust. She drove away and Reed walked inside. The clubhouse was full, not just Iron Wolves, but people from the neighborhood, families who'd been helped, workers who'd found solidarity. It wasn't just a motorcycle club anymore. It had become something bigger, a symbol of resistance, proof that people who stood together could face down power. Mason called the meeting to order, and they went through club business, upcoming runs, maintenance schedules, community events. Then Mason looked at Reed. Brother, you got anything to add? Reed stood. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward him, his brothers and the community they'd chosen to serve. 6 months ago, a man offered me money to compromise who we are. He thought everything had a price, that respect was just another commodity to be bought and sold. He was wrong. Reed looked around the room. We paid a price for standing up to him. Lost our home, faced threats, had to rebuild from ash. But we did it together, and we did it right. We proved that some things are more valuable than money. Some things can't be bought. He paused, feeling the weight of what they'd accomplished. Respect isn't given, it's earned. Every mile we ride, every promise we keep, every time we stand up for what's right, even when it costs us, that's how we earn it. That's how we keep it. That's how we pass it on to the next generation. Hawk raised his beer, to respect. The room echoed with it, to respect. They drank, and they talked, and they planned for tomorrow, because that's what survivors do. That's what brothers do. Outside, Reed's bike sat waiting in the lot, chrome catching the last light of day.
The engine was warm from the ride over, still ticking as it cooled. He ran his hand along the seat, felt the familiar leather under his palm. His phone buzzed. Unknown number again. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Yeah? Mr. Reed? A woman's voice, professional, careful. My name is Jennifer Torres. I represent a coalition of tenant organizations and workers' rights groups. We've been watching what you and your club did, standing up to Marcus Hale. We're wondering if you'd be interested in consulting with us on similar cases. Reed smiled. Consulting how? Hale's not the only powerful man exploiting people. We're seeing a pattern. Wealthy developers, corrupt officials, companies that put profit over safety. They rely on people being too scared or isolated to fight back. But you showed there's another way. She paused. We can pay. Not much, but something. And we could really use people who understand how to stand up to bullies. Reed looked back at the clubhouse, at the light spilling from windows, at brothers and friends and community gathered in defiance of everything that said they should have broken by now. We're not for hire, Reed said, but we stand with people who stand up for themselves. You organize, you fight, you keep it clean, we'll be there. That's all we're asking. Then you got us. He hung up and walked back inside, where Mason was telling his story about the old clubhouse, about the first time Reed's grandfather had faced down a threat. The room listened with the attention stories like that deserved, because stories were how wisdom traveled, how values got passed down, how a club became a legacy. And Reed understood something then, something his grandfather had probably known all along. Respect wasn't something you protected by hiding from the world. It was something you earned by engaging with it, by taking stands, by helping people who needed help, not because it paid well, but because it was right.
The Iron Wolves weren't just surviving. They were building something that would outlast them all. Reed caught Mason's eye across the room, and the old rider nodded, a small gesture that carried the weight of shared understanding. They'd been tested, and they'd passed. Not because they were stronger or smarter or richer than their enemies, but because they'd remembered who they were. The meeting wound down, people filtering out into the night. Reed stayed behind with a few brothers, cleaning up, securing the building, checking the locks. Small rituals that meant everything. Taking care of what was theirs, protect. The Iron Wolves weren't just surviving. They were building something that would outlast them all. Reed caught Mason's eye across the room, and the old rider nodded, a small gesture that carried the weight of shared understanding. They'd been tested, and they'd passed. Not because they were stronger or smarter or richer than their enemies, but because they'd remembered who they were. The meeting wound down, people filtering out into the night. Reed stayed behind with a few brothers, cleaning up, securing the building, checking the locks. Small rituals that meant everything. Taking care of what was theirs, protecting what they'd built together. Outside, a young guy on a beat-up motorcycle pulled into the lot. He killed his engine, pulled off his helmet, and approached the door with the careful respect of someone entering sacred ground. Reed met him at the entrance. "Help you?" "I heard about your club," the kid said. He couldn't have been more than 25, nervous energy radiating off him like heat. "About what you did with Hale, about how you stood up to him." "We had help," Reed said. "A lot of help." "Yeah, but you started it. You said no when it would have been easier to say yes." The kid shifted his weight. "I'm looking for something like that, something that means something. My dad rode with a club once, told me stories before he died, about brotherhood, about the code, about writing for something bigger than yourself." Reed studied him, saw the hunger for belonging, for purpose, for something real in a world that felt increasingly fake. He'd seen that look before, in mirrors and in the eyes of men who'd become his brothers. "What's your name?" "Carter." "Carter, this club isn't easy. We don't make money, we don't take shortcuts. We stand for things that cost us, and we don't compromise. You understand what that means?" "I think so." "No," Reed said gently. "You don't. Not yet. But if you stick around, if you put in the work, if you prove yourself worthy of the patch, you'll learn. Same way we all did." Carter's face lit up with hope that made Reed feel old and young at the same time. "Come to the meeting next week," Reed said. "We'll talk. No promises, but we'll talk." "Thank you," Carter said, and the gratitude in his voice was genuine, the kind that comes from finding a path forward when you thought you were lost. Reed watched him right away, then turned back to the clubhouse. Mason was leaning against the doorframe, had heard the whole thing. "New blood," Mason observed. "Maybe," Reed said, "if he's got what it takes." "You had doubts about yourself once too." "Still do sometimes." Mason laughed, the sound rich and full. "That's how you know you're doing it right, brother. The moment you stop questioning, stop examining, stop making sure you're worthy of the patch, that's when you lose it." They stood together in the doorway, two men who'd seen the club through fire and threats and the temptation of easy money, who'd chosen the hard road because it was the right road. Inside, someone turned on music, old rock and roll, the kind that had soundtracked 1,000 rides and 1,000 stories. The bass thumped through the floorboards, steady as a heartbeat. "You ever regret it?" Mason asked, "turning down Hale's money?" Reed thought about it honestly, about the clubhouse they'd lost, the struggles they'd faced, the easier path they could have taken. "No," he said finally, "because if we'd said yes, we wouldn't be who we are. We'd just be another crew for hire, another group of guys who sold their souls for comfort. This, what we built, what we protected, what we stand for, this matters. This is worth every brick through the window, every threat, every sleepless night." Mason clapped him on the shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud." "Hope so." They went back inside, back to their brothers, back to the warmth and noise and belonging that couldn't be bought at any price. Because that's what they learned, what they'd proven. Respect isn't something you can purchase or sell. It's something you earn,
mile by mile, promise by promise, stand by stand. And the Iron Wolves had earned theirs. The music played on, and they laughed and talked and planned for tomorrow. Outside, the city sprawled in all its complexity, full of Marcus Hales and Sarah Chens, of people who'd lost their way and people fighting to find it, of corruption and courage existing side by side. But here, in this converted warehouse on the edge of town, 50 men and women had built something that mattered, something that would outlast them, that would inspire the next generation, that would prove that there were still people in the world who couldn't be bought. Reed looked at the wolf's head on the wall, his grandfather's patch, carefully preserved, a reminder of where they'd come from and where they were going. The wolf's eyes seemed to gleam in the lamplight, fierce and proud and free, just like them. The road stretched ahead, uncertain and difficult and absolutely worth riding. They'd face new challenges, new threats, new temptations, but they'd face them together, with their respect intact and their heads held high. Because they'd learned the most important lesson: you can't buy what matters most. You can only earn it, protect it, and pass it on. And that's exactly what they intended to do. Forever free, forever loyal, forever riding for respect, not for sale. The Iron Wolves howled their defiance at the night, and the night howled back with the promise of tomorrow.